Logitech claims their new mouse, the Super Strike, is up to 30 milliseconds faster than anything else, and today, we're going to see if that's true. Gaming mice have already become extremely fast when it comes to click latency, and this has been done by almost totally eliminating the processing delay after the switch has been clicked. But this new mouse reduces the delay before it. How are they doing that? Well, it's with the weirdest switch that you've ever seen in a gaming mouse. In fact, there are no switches inside this thing at all. Instead, you've got an inductive coil and a haptic motor. That's pretty important because what we're really trying to measure here is how much of a real-world latency reduction there is by raising that actuation point, by minimizing the pre-travel. How much quicker is the input? So I've gone as bro science as possible for this one, literally just resting my finger on the trigger like I normally would, pressing at a normal force, and then measuring that time delay between the trigger starting to move and then a flash on the monitor. I've got a 720Hz monitor, 50/90 setup, and a high-speed camera that costs the same as a decent car. I know with a lot of latency and peripheral testing, the goal is to eliminate every variable except for the one that you're testing. But I personally think that there is still a lot of value in testing in a way that's closest to how things are being used. And we do see some pretty interesting stuff. Here's what level 1 looks like. As you can see, it actuates extremely early. And yeah, it does feel like that. After taking 40 samples, we get an average of just below 10 milliseconds, which is actually absurdly quick considering that is the entire end-to-end latency chain plus the movement delay of the trigger. And then here's level 10, the deepest actuation setting that you can set the Super Strike to. The difference is night and day, and in these tests, it's a 35 millisecond difference. The coil is able to sense how far you are pressing down the trigger, and from that, it's able to generate an analog signal, similar to what we now have on keyboards. And just like those, for the first time ever on a gaming mouse, you can adjust the actuation point. So here you have 10 different levels, level 1 being the most sensitive, and level 10 right at the bottom. It's not the exact same technology, it's not Hall effect, but it does achieve the same thing. I'd say a normal switch depth is roughly around level 6, so with any settings above that, you're essentially removing the pre-travel delay compared to a normal mouse. Level 1 is almost no input at all. Level 2 is a lot more usable, but still a very early actuation, and then you've got like level 3, 4, 5. There's still going to be a lot earlier than a normal mouse switch, but just a little bit more dead zone. You can probably see where this is going. You want to be using the highest actuation point that you can, while avoiding misclicks or avoiding having to grip your mouse differently. This shows us just how much pre-travel actually contributes to real-world latency. And these aren't just numbers. Doing these tests, feeling the clicks, and seeing the flash on the monitor, level 1 feels like it's clicking telepathically, and level 10 feels like the mouse is broken. But how does this compare to a normal gaming mouse? Well, how about the fastest one that I've tested? This is the Endgame Gear OP18K. It uses a wide 8000 Hz connection, and it has a click latency of just 87 microseconds. That is virtually instant, and it's not even in the same playing field. In fact, Logitech's claim of being up to 30 milliseconds faster is actually not far off here at all. With a normal pressing force starting from the top of the trigger, there's a 27 millisecond difference between them. That is huge. This test was also done with the OP1 switches in speed mode. This mouse uses what's called an SPDT switch, allowing it to activate at the start of the pole transition instead of the end. The latency improvement by doing this has been massively overblown recently for some reason. You save about 1 millisecond by turning the setting on. What about more conservative actuation settings, like level 2 and 3? Well, those two are still very quick in this test. The actuation point is above what a regular mechanical switch can do, so it activates a lot earlier. In fact, even with the Super Strike at level 5, just slightly above a normal click, I was getting faster results than the OP18K. This shows us that the analog and firmware processing side of things seems to be pretty quick as well. So yeah, lower distance to travel, you can get a much earlier input. This mouse does exactly what it says it does. But does any of this actually make a difference when you're playing games? Well, something to think about is that when you're lining up a sick one tap in a game, you're waiting for someone to enter your crosshair. You're not sitting there with your finger like lifted off the trigger. I would argue that you're actually already primed and pre-tense, naturally closing some of that pre-travel anyway on a regular mouse. As the enemy approaches the crosshair, you time that click perfectly. I mean, it's not like we're all out here missing our shots by 30 milliseconds or having to click 30 milliseconds early. If you use any mouse for more than a day, you can be pretty well calibrated and in tune with where that actuation point is. So for me, I can't say that I was hitting shots on this mouse that I wouldn't have already hit on a normal mouse. In fact, it was quite the opposite, especially at the start. You know, level 1, 2, and even setting 3 on the actuation. I was mistiming and misclicking my shots. I had to play with my index finger a lot more relaxed and passive even when anticipating a shot, and that didn't feel great. The sweet spot for me on the Super Strike was honestly around like level 4 or 5. At that point, I could play confidently again, properly grip the mouse, not worry about misclicking, and it still felt a little bit shorter than a regular Switch, which was nice. I went back more than a few times trying those higher actuation settings, but I just couldn't make them work for the way that I want to grip a mouse. Everyone's experience will vary differently, you know, on this mouse. People use different grips, different clicking pressures, and so people will like it. People will be able to use different actuation settings and just find something that works for them, exactly the same as you would with a keyboard. And then we've got the haptic motor, one underneath each trigger, simulating that physical click feel as you hit that actuation point. These feel completely different to a normal mouse click. With a normal click, there is that really noticeable drop-off in force just as you click. That tension is released, and not only can you feel the click sensation, but you can feel it release. These triggers don't do that. In fact, at that click moment, they actually bump back at the trigger. Thankfully though, this too is adjustable, and I prefer this on the lightest setting, which is level 1. You can also turn the haptics off completely and just have a purely passive dead trigger, but I wouldn't recommend that at all. But yeah, if you want stronger haptic strengths for whatever reason, you've got a few more settings there to play with. With those haptics turned right down, it is a super nice and comfortable mouse to use. But what about for gaming? Well, testing this is actually kind of difficult. Typically, I'd be using an XLAT or a solenoid for this type of testing, but those won't really show us anything here. A solenoid would be activating the switch pretty much instantly, so you wouldn't be really measuring any pre-travel delay between the different settings, or compared to other mice. It's important to take personal experiences like mine with a grain of salt for that very reason. And you know, I have my own preferences when it comes to gaming mice as well. I prefer the really lightweight stuff because tracking-based games is what I enjoy the most. With all of that in mind, I would still say that if you are a Grow X enjoyer, if you have the first Grow X or any of the Superlights, this is definitely an upgrade. Even with the actuation point set to level 4, with the haptics turned all the way down to like level 1, the clicks and the triggers here feel better than any Superlight that I've tried. But just remember, your clicks aren't literally going to be 30 milliseconds faster than everyone else's in the lobby. If you're a competent player who can already hit one taps and click timing scenarios, I can't say this will change much for you, other than giving you a shorter pre-travel switch and just a different feeling switch in general. Even if you can get an improved score in a reaction time test, there's basically no point in any game where an enemy will just suddenly appear in your crosshairs and you have to click and react as fast as possible. Almost always, there is plenty of lead time. I also think this is very different to an analog keyboard switch. With keyboard switches, there was so much room for improvement because the switch travel was so huge. The micro switches in mice, on the other hand, already have relatively short pre-travel. If we were coming from like a 4mm mouse switch, then I think the benefit here would be absolutely massive and I'd be telling everyone to buy one. But the usable improvement is not huge. Also, while rapid trigger on keyboards has been one of the craziest things in peripherals ever, here on a mouse, it basically just allows you to spam click faster. The weight as well is something that I care quite a lot about, especially for tracking. You know, it's the reason I made the Zero mouse and haven't switched off anything since. This is over 2.5 times the weight. It's a bit front heavy as well, and the ships are it's all its luxuries. Kinstein guys like Sonic. The Kontinentalteater Torrensleitauser Uranslike ein Krenslaichens support that a lot of mice these days offer. I will say though, if you can somehow make that level 1 actuation or level 2 actuation point work on the Super Strike, it is potentially deadly. Like, I couldn't make it work for myself. I have to, you know, relax my index fingers, play a lot more passively, which I just don't like. There's too much inhibition when I play with this mouse with those really high actuation settings. I want to play confidently. I want to be able to grip my mouse and anticipate where that pre-travel is. Maybe you could say it's a skill issue. I don't know, but those are just my honest impressions. I also think it is just generally extremely cool what Logitech have done here. The implementation side of things, how this all goes together with the software, how simple it is all working flawlessly. This also got me thinking about pre-travel and click force and all of that stuff in a completely different light. Aside from the Zero mouse, this has been the most interested that I've been in testing a gaming mouse in a very long time.